Hi everyone, I'm Rob Panting, the Communications Manager at OxLEP. This is the first of our digital Q&As that we put in place as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, here to support our business community. And without further ado, I'll hand you over to our Chair, Howard Bentham.
Thanks, Rob, and a very warm welcome. I am Howard Bentham, and this is the first in a new series of digital Q&As from the Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. As a direct response to these unprecedented times with the global COVID-19 pandemic locking us all down and putting a massive strain on our health service, economy, lives and livelihoods, our aim is to provide a platform where Oxfordshire businesses can ask questions and get some expert opinion from members of the invited OxLEP panels. We'll cover many topic areas over the coming weeks with our digital Q&As, and we're very much open to suggestions from you for areas to focus our content. Feel free to contact us directly. You'll find details on the OxLEP website, as well as our social media channels. And we look forward to hearing from you. For our first Q&A, we're going to concentrate specifically on business finance. What help is out there, where to find it, and how accessible is it? We'll also look at how businesses can prepare themselves for what might be the new normal, whatever that might look like, and whenever it might begin. This session is pre-recorded. You won't be able to interact live today. However, our aim in the coming weeks is for you to be able to put your questions directly to our experts. We want local businesses to look on our Q&As as a valuable resource of information. OxLEP very much wants to support you during this incredibly difficult period. There's a whole host of useful links and information sheets on all matters dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're on the OxLEP website. Do take time to follow up the information mentioned in this broadcast at oxfordshirelep.com. So let me introduce our panel today. We're delighted to have with us to discuss business finance, Isabel Bishop. Isabel is a partner in the employment team at Knights plc, delivering legal and professional services right across the UK. She's an experienced advocate, providing representation at employment tribunals, covering issues such as discrimination cases, whistleblowing and equal pay, among other areas. She's been a key part of the team at Knights since 1991. Wendy Hart. Wendy is a partner at Grant Thornton, the global assurance, tax and business advisory organisation, who state on their website that they understand what you need today and what you'll need tomorrow. Never has that been more apt than right now for most businesses watching this. Wendy and her team were voted Corporate Financial Advisor of the Year in 2018 in the Thames Valley, and she's got over 30 years of experience in deals, private equity funded transactions and management buyouts. She's also a non-executive director at OxLEP. Councillor Barry Woods. Barry is the leader of Cherwell District Council. He represents the villages of Fringford and Hayfords Ward on the council and has been the leader since 2004. He's also a member of the Oxfordshire Growth Board and an associate member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. In addition, he's the current chairman of the Strategic Delivery Board for EcoBista. He's a graduate of Salford University, where he was also president of the union, and he's also a member of the OxLEP board. And Ashley Keane. Ashley is a local director at Metrobank in Oxford. Metrobank first opened their doors in the summer of 2010, the first high street bank to open in over a century. Ashley leads over 20 colleagues, lending across retail and commercial banking. He formerly worked at Santander and Lloyds Banking Group. He's got a diploma in business banking from the IFS School of Finance and is an economics graduate from Loughborough University. A very warm welcome to all our panellists. Now, in the space of about 6 short weeks with lockdown and all its implications, our local and national economy has taken a massive hit. The UK government have tried to provide a safety net for those in employment, self-employment and those running businesses. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, in March unveiled an unprecedented stimulus package with a £330 billion guaranteed loan scheme. Alongside this were increased grants, VAT deferrals, business rate relief, with the government saying it would do whatever it takes to keep Britain afloat during the crisis. We also have the coronavirus job retention scheme running alongside the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. So let's explore what is actually out there. So let's first look at the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. Wendy, could you please just outline how this works?
Okay, yeah, happy to. So the CBILS loans have been put in place by the government through 40 or so normal banks and funding providers, and they're designed to support those businesses which would otherwise have been fine. So had this COVID-19 not hit, these are businesses which were trading perfectly well and have specifically been impacted by COVID. And they are quite generous, so you can borrow anything up to 5 million, but the bank that lends has to be satisfied about your ability to repay that debt once this pandemic is over. So it's generous, arguably free money because there's no interest on it for the first year. But in order to access it, the lender has to be comfortable that it will ultimately be repaid. And it's on that basis that the bank's 80% guarantee is available to the bank. So it's not free money, and it's not as easy as it first appears to get.
Well, let's explore that with a banker, Metrobank's Ashley Keane. Metrobank is one of the government's approved lenders for the scheme. Ashley, what type of businesses and from which main sectors are approaching you for support?
So we're seeing businesses from across the whole piece, really. I mean, there's, obviously the hospitality, leisure industries, travel industry, the first one to really sort of feel the hit and have come to us. But I'm in no doubt that as this goes on, there's going to be very few businesses out there that aren't impacted by this in some way or another. The scheme is open to the majority of businesses. The key things, they have to be a trading business as opposed to, say, a property business. That the majority of the income has to be derived from trading activities. But in terms of sectors and what sectors this is available to, it really is very broad.
Now, as Wendy was saying, it's interest free and lender charge free for the first year. What happens after that?
Correct. Yeah. So there are no arrangement fees with these CBILS loans. There is an interest free period and a capital repayment holiday to start with. But after that 12-month period, this then reverts to a standard loan in the sense that it is repaid on a monthly or quarterly basis, and the longest term that these CBILS loans are available over is 6 years. So a CBILS loan taken up today would have a 12-month interest and capital holiday, but as of April 2021, that would then revert to a repayment facility which would be repaid over the coming years.
And what sort of interest rate?
So it's been, the government have left it to banks to set their own interest rate for this. I can only speak on behalf of Metrobank. So Metrobank have taken a view and have set the rates at 6.25 if this facility is larger than £250,000, or for facilities less than £250,000, it's a rate of 6.75%.
How does that compare with the rest of the market?
That's from as I understand that's broadly in line with the rest of the market.
We'll come back about the guarantees in a moment, but Barry, if I can just come to you, many businesses have been reluctant to take on a large loan to service their debt with no immediate prospect of income from customers. Did the Chancellor misjudge this? I know it's a political question. I mean, servicing a debt with another debt.
Well, I think there has to be a balance between direct grants, of which there are the small ones which the local government family have been dealing with, and then business rates of relief, which is another way to help go through the emergency we're in at the moment. And then there are loans as well for, I would imagine, really primarily for larger enterprises to access. And there has to be, I think, a balance between direct bailout, just grants, and loans. And I think the balance is about right. I mean, you can argue the balance one way or the other, but I think it's about right.
What about the issue of guarantees, Ashley, just coming back to you? I mean, these are 80% covered by the government, with the other 20% taken with personal guarantees. How's that been playing out with businesses coming to you at Metrobank?
That's right. So when the scheme was initially launched, the guidance was that the government provided an 80% guarantee, but it would be up to the lender to then take additional security if they felt that that was necessary. We then, so when we first started doing them, we were, some lenders were asking for personal guarantees and supporting security for these personal guarantees. That guidance then changed a couple of weeks after it was launched to say that for facilities at the smaller end, so I'm talking sort of less than 250,000, banks shouldn't be taking personal guarantees in addition to the government guarantee. So we, again, I speak for Metrobank, we followed that guidance. We implemented a process, so we do not ask for personal guarantees for facilities of £250,000 or less now. For facilities greater than that, then the greatest personal guarantee we can ask for is for the 20% rather than a full personal guarantee. So yeah, again, that's left at lenders' discretions as to whether they want to take that guarantee or whether they want any supporting security for that guarantee. But the government have told us, no terms of uncertainty, that we cannot charge primary principal residences in support of those guarantees if we take them for those facilities that are bigger than £250,000.
I know the Chancellor just this week has announced 100% government guarantee, hasn't he, for the sort of micro businesses, really, loans up to £50,000 for those with a handful of employees with cash flow issues. How's that going to change the lending landscape on the ground, particularly in Oxford and Oxfordshire? Yeah,
and that's correct. I mean, this is a very, very recent announcement, and yeah, the scheme is being officially launched as of the 4th of March, so Monday. So, Metrobank, as I'm sure all other lenders, are sort of frantically trying to work through the detail of this and put something in place. But in theory, it's going to make the application process a lot slicker. It's going to make the time to cash a lot quicker. From what I hear and understand, it's a two-page application form. You self-certify effectively that the business it was viable prior to this, and that it can repay the debt when it turns into a repayment facility. The government provide a 100% guarantee for that, so it's I guess from a bank from a risk point of view, there's not that part of the liability that you would have to you have to reclaim from the borrower in a gone event. So in theory, it sounds great. We are just waiting for a bit more detail, a bit more guidance as to how we should actually implement this, and I'm sure by the start of next week we'll know a lot more.
Isabel, if I could just come to you, I mean, what's your view on the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme? The governor of the Bank of England has said the loan system is too complicated. Is he right?
Well, if it's anything like the coronavirus job retention scheme, it's going to be extremely complicated. It's not something which I personally have had a great deal to do with. I know one or two of our clients have said that they've been having difficulties getting through to it, and I suspect that probably things have improved. But I think to start with, my understanding at any rate, and as I say, I haven't had any direct involvement with this, is that it was very difficult for people to actually access it. But I think that things have improved since then, and it is something people need. But I think a lot of people are reluctant to take on a loan where they are thinking, well, how long is everything going to take before it gets back to normal again, and are they going to be in a position to repay it? But certainly, it's the right thing to do. Something has to be done, doesn't it, to protect businesses and the economy.
We'll get a brief answer from all of you, if I may. Any advice to Rishi Sunak on what would improve the offer generally? Isabel?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. I suppose from the point of view of businesses, it would be knowing that perhaps they had a bit longer to pay it back. But on the other hand, from the point of view of the economy and everybody else, that probably isn't a very good place to be. So I'm not sure that I could give him any advice, really.
What about your thoughts on this? I mean, the complication is one thing. I think the uptake nationally just a couple of days ago was about 22,000 loans across the UK, when you think about the size of the businesses and the amount of debt that companies are in at the moment. Any advice for the Chancellor?
Yeah, I think probably, and this is sorting itself out as time passes, but I think, as he progresses and as he does more things or as he changes things, I think clarity and consistency of communication are really important. So one of the things that the Chancellor said when he first announced the CBILS loans was, you know, if a business was strong in February, it'll be strong in September, which patently isn't true. There are some businesses that will come through this and recover very quickly. There are others that are, you know, doing better as a result of the pandemic. And there are many businesses who will find it much harder and much slower to recover and will be rightly concerned, as the banks will, with their ability to ultimately repay. So I think clarity as to what the loans are intended to do, clarity as to what is required by the banks in order to get them, which has been a voyage of discovery for a lot of businesses, and consistency about how long these processes are likely to take would be really helpful, so that people understand right at the outset what's involved in making a loan application.
Barry, your thoughts on what would be good advice to the Chancellor on these loans?
Yes, I'm tempted to say that simplicity would be my watchword on these sort of schemes. But I'm conscious all the time that what we're talking about is public money, and there has to be a balance between straight out simplicity and a degree of due diligence and a degree of action against potential fraud. So it's not an easy thing to give advice on. I think that's where I end up with this.
Actually, just before we move on, I mean, what would make it simpler for you giving the loans?
I mean, I think in hindsight, if we think about, you know, how could we have, you know, managed this better and got cash to our customers, you know, more quickly than we have, and you know, generalising for the industry as a whole, there's certainly been you know, things written and said about how long it's taken to get this money. Ideally, we would have had a lot more, you know, clarity and guidance at the outset. You know, in a normal environment, to roll out a scheme like this one would take months and months. You would trial it, you would test it with a small number of customers, you would iron out any of the teething issues around the process. Clearly, you know, this is unprecedented. This has had to be rolled out very, very quickly, and therefore we're sort of having to make this up as we go. So, you know, the guidance from when this was initially launched, you know, 4 or 5 weeks ago has changed 2 or 3 times and continues to change and evolve. We are definitely getting better. You know, we have honed our processes. We are now getting a bit of traction and getting some of this money out the door. It is becoming easier to assess these because we're more clear on the way we should be assessing them, and hopefully that will be something that continues to evolve and become better. So it's not, I mean, you know, hindsight's one of the things. Ideally, it would have been more clarification at the start, but I appreciate that, you know, the government, the Chancellor, wasn't in a position to do that, and I do think, you know, the ideas behind it are good. And I would add, you know, from the bank's point of view, there is absolutely a desire to help our customers and to get this money to them, but we have to act in a way where ultimately, you know, we are custodians of the government's money here, and we have to be responsible lenders, and that's the issue. It's you know, doing the right level of due diligence in the right way to be able to lend this money safely and responsibly. You know, it's not the right thing to do to saddle businesses with more debt if they're not going to be able to afford to repay that ultimately, and the government's going to have to then pay up under the guarantee. So yeah, you know, complex situation, fast moving situation. Those are my sort of overriding thoughts on it, really.
A quick one-word answer, or a very few-word answer from each of you. I think I know what Ashley's is going to be. If you were running a medium-sized business in the current climate, an acid test, would you apply for a coronavirus business interruption loan? Ashley?
Well, we always advise the customers who do come to us to look at all of the options available. So find out what grants are available, find out, you know, how the furlough scheme is going to work before taking on additional debt. But if debt is one of the parts of the solution to seeing them through this, then yes, I think the idea is, you know, a good one.
A qualified yes from Ashley Keane. Isabel Bishop?
I think that if I was satisfied that my business was going to come out the other end in a healthy state, then I think yes.
Councillor Barry Wood?
Probably, but I'd have an eye on what my current exposure to debt already was.
Wendy Hart?
Yeah, no, I agree with everybody else. Provided I was confident of servicing it, then I would take it. But I would have taken advantage of all of the other things that the government is allowing, like deferral of tax and deferral of rates and deferral of VAT before I went there, which I'm sure most businesses have.
We're going to have a look at each of those in a short while, but first let's take a closer look at the coronavirus job retention scheme. Isabel, perhaps you could outline for us exactly what this is.
Right, thanks, Howard. Yes, well, it is exactly what it says on the tin, actually. It is a job retention scheme, because obviously this was first announced on the 20th of March, and I have to say I had to go and look up in the dictionary what furlough meant when the Chancellor first said it, and I think I've spoken to a lot of people and they said they did exactly the same.
Something to do with farming, I think.
But anyway, I mean, the whole problem is that everywhere throughout the country, businesses were being instructed to close down. You weren't allowed to go to pubs, restaurants, shops, social distancing, all of these things, which meant that a very significant number of businesses simply could not continue to perform as normal. And therefore, the automatic reaction would be, oh my goodness me, we're going to have to get rid of all the staff. Now, if that had happened, it would have been absolute chaos. And I don't think it would have been possible to have social distancing. I think we'd have had social unrest. We'd have had, mass riots on the streets and coronavirus everywhere. So I think it had to be done. And, the government recognises that it's got to do something and is providing this backup grant for people so that they don't need to make a decision immediately. Oh my goodness, we've got to get rid of everyone and make people redundant. So what it's intended to do is to enable employers to lay their employees off. Now you have to get agreement to that because it's a variation to their contract of employment, and the government will cover up to 80% of their gross salary, up to £2,500 per month, plus employers' NI and the 3% auto-enrolment pension contribution. So the government will provide all of that. Originally, it was for people who'd been employed up to the 28th of February. Then it was extended to the 19th of March. You had to be in employment then, but that's a little bit tricky. Originally, it started with effect from the 1st of March and was going to run up to the 31st of March. 31st of May. It's now been extended to the 30th of June. Under this scheme, if anyone is furloughed, then they can't work for their employer or any related employer, and they can't provide any services or do anything which will bring any income to them. The furlough has to be for a minimum period of 3 weeks, and in order to be able to take advantage of it, the employee concerned have to be paid through the PAYE system. So that's just furlough in a nutshell.
Beautifully done, thank you. What conversations, Isabel, what conversations have you had with your clients about furloughing staff?
Oh, endless. It has been, as I'm sure you can imagine, it has been the main topic of advice we've been given in recent weeks. And people are saying, well, should we furlough these people? Should we furlough those people? How do we go about claiming the money? When's it going to be paid? And an awful lot of the time, we simply haven't had the answers because there hasn't been the information out there. And I have to say, I think the government did a remarkable thing putting this together so quickly. But the first lot of guidance came out on, I think it was the 20th of March or thereabouts. We've now had 8 versions of it, 8 updates, and a lot of the things are, there's a great deal of uncertainty because, to be fair, the people who have put this together probably haven't had the sorts of questions that I and my colleagues have had. Well, what happens in these circumstances? Can we take holiday? Does that mean we're going to have to unfurlough people? Can we furlough and then unfurlough? To which the answer is yes, so long as each period of furlough is at least 3 weeks. But it's very often we've had people saying, well, somebody's asked to be furloughed. We've got issues where people can't send their children to school. So some people who've got young children have specifically asked, can they be furloughed? But we have to remember that this is a grant for people who would otherwise, potentially, who would otherwise be made redundant or who cannot work because of the COVID situation. And if an employer has got work for them to do, if they're working in a business, maybe providing carers to people or something like that, where people still need the care, or delivery drivers or shops which are open, these sorts of things, they need people to work. And so then somebody might be asking to be furloughed, but that's not really what the scheme is for. And we do sometimes have to say to people, to employers, well, look, you need to think about that's actually whether that is actually what the scheme is for, or whether potentially HMRC, when they audit at a later stage, might say, well, hang on, that's a bit of an abuse of it. I mean, we just simply don't know at this stage what might happen, because it is, it is still very early days and everything is changing.
Wendy, in your recent experience, to what extent are businesses taking advantage of the scheme as an indicator what proportion of employers have furloughed through the job retention scheme from what you've seen?
I don't know the exact proportion, but I think a huge number of employers have taken advantage of the furlough scheme. It's probably the most significant lifeline that the government's provided. As Isabel said, it's been massively significant to buying people time, buying employers time, buying individual workers time. It's been very, very valuable. And my take on it is most of those businesses who feel it's appropriate for them to take it, and there are businesses, there's been a lot in the press about football clubs, actually professional services practices, Grant Thornton hasn't furloughed because it feels like an inappropriate thing for us to do because we can afford not to at the moment. But for most of the businesses that we're working with, sort of SMEs, they have taken full advantage of the furlough scheme. Yeah.
Let's hope it saves lots of jobs. In the public sector, Barry, at Cherwell District Council, how many employees have you been able to furlough, and how's it affecting services?
Well, we don't furlough in the public sector at all. It's not applicable to the state sector. So there is no, we're lucky in that there's been no impact on our public facing services from the council at all, for which we're very grateful, particularly for people like the refuse collectors who have a lot of potential public contact. I think the important thing for us is to retain our public facing services as much as we can, and we have experienced a great deal of change in the way the back office, for want of a better phrase, is working, and I think that will have long-term implications for the way in which the state sector constructs itself going forward.
Do you want to just give us a bit more detail on that? That's quite interesting. So we're learning lessons now about what's going to happen in the future. We will come back to this, but just to sort of whet our appetite, how might things be different, Barry? Well,
I think what it means is we've found out that home working is much more productive than you might have thought that it was. And we've always had home working, but never pushed the boat out, so to speak. It's always been in the background, and now we found out that the organisation is running very efficiently this way, and that in turn, I think, will have run-on effects for the office estate that we need to keep in future. So there is going to be some run-on effects, but they will be in the medium term. They won't be overnight.
Just Isabel and Wendy, between the two of you, some detail on this. You've touched on this already, Isabel. How flexible is the scheme? You can be unfurloughed. It's 3 weeks, you said it. Any other situations around the sort of flexibility of the scheme people need to be aware of?
Well, yes, I think one of the things that was of great concern coming up to the Easter weekend was what happens about holiday, because there was concern because holiday hadn't been touched on at all in terms of furlough. People were furloughing people, and then they were saying, well, if we take them off furlough and give them back Good Friday and Easter Monday as bank holidays and count those as holidays, does that mean they have to be unfurloughed? In that case, we might not have furloughed them for 3 weeks and so on. So it has become clear now that they can have holiday while they're on furlough. And some of my clients are saying, we're really worried that when people come back from furlough, they're then going to want to take all their holiday because they won't have been able to go away during the period of furlough, and well, they probably won't for some considerable time anyway. But so what we think is the case, and it is still not 100% clear, what we think is the case is that people can take holiday, and there is an entitlement for employers under the working time regulations to actually require employees to take holiday. Now, it's not very often used, but some of my clients are asking their employees if they will take, say, a couple of days holiday, for which they would have to have their pay made up to full pay during a period of furlough, just to try and spread it out a little bit. So there does appear to be that flexibility. For instance, I've got one client who their person who deals with payroll will be furloughed for 3 weeks, then we'll have a week back at work to deal with the payroll, then we'll be furloughed again. So there is, you know, there is quite a bit of flexibility there, really. And they can, of course, volunteer for other organisations, or they can volunteer for any organisation. They can go and work for other organisations. So somebody who's been furloughed from one job could, for instance, take up a secondary job as a delivery driver, or whatever. Or you get a lot of people who are volunteering, you know, delivering parcels to food to vulnerable people and so on. So it is pretty flexible. But, you know, as I say, there is so much uncertainty, really, that a lot of it is just kind of guessing and trying to go along with the guidance, which doesn't necessarily correspond with the Treasury direction that was issued.
Interesting. Wendy, any pitfalls of the system that you've spotted so far? Anything people need to be aware of?
No, I think only the point that Isabel made earlier, which is that this scheme is intended as a redundancy avoidance scheme, and therefore anybody who is furloughed is by definition at risk of redundancy, and it would be easy for that to get lost in the noise, but that is the truth, and clearly if things go on indefinitely, that is probably where some people will end up, just because I doubt that the government can afford to do this forever. So yeah, it's just being aware of what this actually is, I suppose.
Barry, if you would talk us now through how local government is administering business rate relief. Firstly, which companies are and which organisations are eligible for this?
Well, there are many companies, of course, that are already, before COVID started, had entitlement to business rate relief, and we now have a relief for those in the hospitality and the leisure sectors, and for small businesses. And so, though the councils, business rates departments know which ones they are, if you know what I mean, by definition, by the rateable values and so forth, and so rate reliefs are administered straight away. It's an automatic process. You don't have to apply for it. It's just done. And so that is relatively straightforward to be dealt with. What becomes more complicated are the grants to small businesses that are administered through business rate paying departments. That is a different ball game, and it's something that is not as straightforward.
Why is it not so straightforward? What's the issue?
Well, because we know what all the people on the database for paying business rates is. We know what their account number is, and we know what their rateable value is. But sometimes we don't know who the people are that run it, or details about the business. Sometimes we haven't got an email contact with a business. Sounds bizarre, but that is the case, because it's business rates is essentially a banking-driven, direct debit-driven process. when it comes to turning around that into paying out grants to small businesses, it becomes much more complicated, and that's that's a truism. We can't escape that. But the efforts that have been put in to dish out the grant money have been very good, and currently in our area we're seeing the order of 65% has been processed. So that's
pretty impressive. 65%. What's that in terms of sheer pounds and pence, Barry?
For example, for the Cherwell district, that's 17 million. So there's quite a big churn of that part of the world, but there is still some work to be done, and we've had to make sure we've got appropriate resources, people working in those areas, even though to be fair, it's not as simple as moving a person from X to Y department. There's sometimes there are skill sets to be picked up en route.
I know from friends who work in retail that it was very welcome, the move by the Chancellor with the business rate relief. But how is local government going to maintain vital services without that income? There's always a flip side to this, and you're the ones, if you like, at the moment, picking up the tab.
Very much so, and that is as well. That is a medium-term problem for us because, and it's a very complicated. But I'll try and simplify it. District councils like mine collect in business rates, but most of the money that we collect passes to the county council, who pay, of course, for adult social care and education, the big spending ticket items, and to the Thames Valley Police. So we are the collecting authority, not the spending authority. But the spending authority still want their money. But we've got, the county has given us it's all right, pay us a bit later holiday on that. So we don't have an immediate cash flow problem. But there is the potential for, as you infer, there is a potential for cash flow difficulties for the collecting authorities. But we're in, through the Local Government Association, we're in constant contact with the department about that. And so we anticipate that, things will be smoothed for us. But there's always trouble with the detail with these things.
Yeah, I mean, just while we're on the subject of finances for local authorities, I know you signed a joint letter from all of Oxfordshire's councils to the Secretary of State for Local Government, warning what will happen if there's not enough central government help. What's the worst case scenario here, Barry?
The worst case scenario, I don't want to frighten the horses, but the worst case scenario is that councils cannot set balanced budgets, and we're legally obliged to do that. And so that is the worst case scenario. I don't think the central government wants to invite an avalanche of situations like it had in Northamptonshire. I don't think it wants to trigger that. And so there will be some resolution as we go forward. And indeed, the local government sector had another 1.6 billion last week. So the purpose of the letter is to constantly keep the lobbying campaign going to make the case for local government, because otherwise we're in danger of losing a vital part of the system when we need to be on the front foot in the recovery stage. And so lobbying ministers is never a bad strategy in my view.
If we can just come back to some of the other help available, Isabel, help us understand some of the other parts of the government's package here. Sick pay, VAT deferrals, for example. Just give us some news we can use here.
Sick pay, well, you're probably better talking to Wendy about VAT deferrals, but in terms of sick pay, there's been assistance from the government in the sense that, generally speaking, businesses, unless they're small businesses, cannot reclaim statutory sick pay through the tax system. However, for COVID-19, they have permitted this for a 2-week period. Also, there's generally speaking a 3-day waiting period before an employee is entitled to SSP. And again, they've done away with that so that an employee can get statutory sick pay straight away. They've also changed some of the rules with regard to sick pay, and it's all quite complicated in terms of who is sick, who falls within the definition of it, and so on. Because when people were sent home to self-isolate, you know, they weren't necessarily sick, but they were deemed to be for the purposes of SSP. So they've made quite a few changes there to make it easier for people to get SSP and for businesses to be able to reclaim it in respect of COVID-19. But there's also been quite a bit of sort of uncertainty regarding the overlap between SSP and coronavirus. So, for instance, if someone is, the job retention scheme, so if someone is furloughed, what happens then if they're off sick? Well, the reality is they probably won't tell their employer and they'll carry on getting furlough pay rather than statutory sick pay. But there are some quite complicated sort of interactions between there, and a certain amount of leeway given by the government to ensure that people always have that safety net of the statutory sick pay.
Wendy, on the VAT?
Well, it's not. I mean, it's not just VAT. It's all taxes. What we've seen right from the word go is that HMRC have been very understanding indeed about people ringing up and saying, can they defer tax payments? So it's just a way of keeping cash in business bank accounts rather than paying it over to the revenue. It's obviously still due and at some point will have to be paid, but as a cash flow boost, it has been the first port of call for most of our clients, and a very welcome one at that.
Ashley, you're hearing from companies seemingly missed out by the Chancellor's package of support. What are they saying to you?
Yeah, we are, you know, absolutely. And I think Rishi Sunak has said it himself, hasn't he, that, you know, unfortunately, despite all the measures that they have announced, to pick up absolutely every business and every person's circumstances is nigh on impossible. So, yeah, we do hear from them. This continues to evolve and new things are announced, and we'll see whether they get picked up in due course. But yeah, they certainly exist.
Isabel, let's briefly take a moment to see how the self-employed are being helped with the package. Do you want to just upsum that?
Of course, yes. This is a little more complicated than employees because, of course, employees are on the PAYE system, so it's all very transparent and it's very easy to see just how much somebody has been paid at various times. In terms of self-employed people, there was a big outcry at the beginning because people who ran, for instance, a small children's nursery, childminders, things like that, who were probably self-employed, who suddenly had to stop. That, you know, their businesses just were closed down effectively overnight and they had nothing. But what has now happened is that there is a taxable grant available of up to 80% of their trading profits, up to £2,500 a month. So in parallel really with the furlough scheme. But it is more complicated because they have to have been trading for a period of time. So they have to have been trading in 2018, 2019 tax year as well as now, or they've got to look at an average of 2016, 17, 18, 18, 19. And it's only available for people whose trading profits are up to a total of £50,000. And that £50,000 must be more than 50% of their total income. So they might have income from a job, property rentals or whatever, but that self-employed income's got to be more than 50% of it. It's a little more complicated because there is no portal or anything open for the moment like there is for employers to get their grants. They say, the government guidance says that they expect to be able to accept claims from mid-May, with payments being made by early June, and it will just be one block payment for a 3-month period. So in the meantime, people are just being advised to apply for normal state benefits, so universal credit, if that's available to them, due to eligibility. So it is much more difficult for self-employed businesses. And of course, somebody, if they earn over £50,000, then they don't get it.
Yes, it's a cliff edge, isn't it? 50,000.
Very much so.
£1,
yes.
And you're over the edge. Actually, national media reports that businesses complain that they've been unable to get through to organisations such as banks in order to access finance. And when they do, some of the organisations have not been that aware. I mean, just from this conversation so far, the minutiae is incredible. Is that a fair criticism, that it is taking too long to respond from the likes of the banks because it's just so complicated?
I think from what I hear, it probably is. And, I speak on behalf of, in terms of Metrobank, I don't believe that's the case. All of our customers, they have my phone number, they have our local business manager's phone number. If they phone us, we pick up the phone, we tell them what we know, and we try to help them. But from an industry point of view, and I can only assume it's down to the sheer volume of inquiries that the industry are getting at the moment. In terms of the number of people banks have on the front line to deal with business customers, and the people they have in their sort of credit underwriting functions, they're just not set up for the volume of thousands and thousands of requests per week. I'm sure that they are doing what they can to address that and move in resource within their business, and I would like to think that's probably getting better across the industry. Certainly in Metrobank, we've moved people around. We've created triage teams to try and protect the credit team, so when applications get to them, they can be processed more quickly. So I think it's a fair criticism. I'd like to think it's something that is being addressed as quickly as we can by the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. Barry was telling us how the back office staff has changed. Obviously, the banking advice side of things has had to change. Anything either Isabel or Wendy you've noticed in terms of how you've had to reorganise your businesses and how they've responded? Wendy?
Gosh, yes. So the day before we were officially all told to go home, we were all sent home to work. So that's 4,200 people working from home overnight. And as people just said, it's been remarkable. It seems just there are bits of our business that are really badly affected. I mean, Beals isn't the best place to be at the moment, but there are other bits of businesses that are flying, and I think what we are able to do more easily than we've done before is to share resources across locations. So historically, if somebody said we need a couple of people in Bristol, you'd require somebody to drive to Bristol to fulfill that role, whereas now it really doesn't matter where people are sitting. They can help out teams or be repurposed very quickly and very efficiently. So I agree. I think there'll be a lot of learnings from this. It's sort of being forced to work virtually that will revolutionise the way that business operates over the coming years.
Interesting. Actually, is it possible to say how badly the pandemic has impacted on business confidence in the region from conversations you've been having with customers?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. It's caused a massive shock, hasn't it? And it's absolutely unprecedented. No one knows where this is going, how long it's going to last. Of course, people are really, really worried about what the future holds for their businesses. At the same time, I think there's a realization that we're all in this together, and we've got to do what we can to support one another and try and pull together to get through this. But yeah, it's hit confidence. It's going to have a long-lasting effect. It's going to change the way that everything is, I think, once we do get back to some sort of normality.
But Barry, has the response from businesses that you've been speaking to surprised you in any way? Any positives to come from this situation?
Well, I think the only positive is that there is definitely an appetite for the recovery stage, and there's also a really impressive dedication almost to maintaining the lockdown principles and to making sure that that no one is inadvertently going to add to the spreading of the virus. So I think there is definitely two stages. There's the stage we're in now, and then the recovery stage, and that's going to be very important. And the role of local councils and their economic development departments, and the way that we operate collectively with a local enterprise partnership is going to be very important for this part of the world. And I, I'm an optimist. I think that there was a strong economy in Oxfordshire, and there's no reason why it can't bounce back, albeit it'll have to be helped, and that that's a role we're going to have to pick up.
Let's look to the future. Wendy, what practical steps can businesses be doing now to prepare for when business resumes again? Thinking about social distancing, work practices, working from home. We've touched on some of this stuff already, but start to paint the picture of what it might look like a few months down the line.
Okay, I mean, I think at the moment, and we're seeing our clients typically now moving from a kind of crisis management mindset into a, okay, what do we need to do to be successful coming out of this? What's the future going to look like? What can we learn from this? And to your question to Barry, I think one of the positives we've seen is a huge amount of creativity in the way people have adapted their business practices, adapted their routes to market already to respond to what is now impossible. I think there'll be more of that. I think who's winning at the moment, who's been least affected by this, the businesses that are the most set up with technology, the most digital, the most virtual in the way that they were operating already, whether that's operating through the cloud or just very sort of asset light operations. And I think that's become very apparent to people that perhaps hadn't accepted that in the past. And I think we'll see more virtualization, more kind of online activity. It's just going to get bigger and bigger, and so I think the businesses that haven't been set up like that in the past, one of the things they can and should be doing is thinking about how digital they can make their business model and how quickly they can evolve it in that way. Your point about office space and ways of working, and how much time do we actually need to spend face-to-face in meetings, and how much do you actually have to drive to the other end of the county in order to have a sales meeting? All of that stuff is been brought into sharp focus. And again, I think slick virtual operating models, those businesses will A, win the quickest coming out of this, and B, will be the most resilient if we have this happen again, which of course we might.
Barry, will this pandemic and what we learn from its social and business impacts shift the focus of local authority spending in the future, do you think?
I think that's quite possible, yes. I think, though, there's going to be an emphasis at the beginning to have make sure that local government's in a position to protect its core services to people, and there's going to be, I think, substantive fallout in sectors such as adult social care, whereby we might have stacked up or stored up cases to be dealt with. So there's going to be some real cost pressures on local government, but surprisingly, you may think councils very often operate like businesses, and so look all the time to innovate and look all the time to find ways to solve their problems. And so I think that there's a great deal to be optimistic about, but we can't be cavalier, and so there's always this balance to be made.
Ashley, if the lockdown continues beyond, say, the end of June, what further financial assistance do you think should be on offer to businesses?
I think the government have made the decision to close down the economy for the right reasons. We don't know how long this is going to take, but there's going to have to be continued support on offer. Probably a balance of that direct cash injection, the deferrals of the tax and VAT and things, but the lending schemes, they're going to have to continue. I can't see how they can not support, if that makes sense.
Looking at things longer term, Isabel, I mean, obviously this financial package is only for a few months. As Ashley's touched on there, it's likely to push on for longer than that. What are the long-term implications for the region in your view?
Well, I think it's going to be the same everywhere, really. If I can just add to what's been said on that point about sort of looking at the future. I mean, obviously, the end of June is where the coronavirus job retention scheme is up to at the moment. My clients have been asking me, what do you think is going to happen then? Should we be starting looking at redundancies and so on? And there will be redundancies, you know, there's absolutely no doubt about that. But I've been saying, well, I think they're going to have to continue providing some support, because otherwise it would almost be like saying, OK, well, we've done social distancing, we can all go back to being together again. You know, we'd undo all the good that's already been done. And I've been thinking that maybe they will suggest something like, rather than it being 80%, it'll come down to 60% or go lower, or that it may be selective, because if some businesses, some sectors are able to go back to work and others aren't. I mean, you think of things like pubs. Well, pubs could be adjusted so that you have to sit in tables and, you know, you could maintain social distancing. But you think about things like theatres, cinemas, football matches and other sporting events where people are very close together. You know, those sorts of things are going to be very, very difficult to reopen in the short term. So it may be that government support will continue in a selective way for different industries. And interestingly, I've just seen today something where the Chancellor, where the Treasury and business leaders and unions are talking about precisely those sorts of things. So they obviously were reading my mind. But I think that, you know, not only this region, but every region, I think, is going to be adversely affected. I don't think there's really any alternative. I mean, you know, it's encouraging to see that people are as positive as they are. And who knows, maybe we will jump back really quickly. I certainly hope so.
Let's hope so. Well, that's it for our first OxLEP Digital Q&A. Thanks once again to our brilliant panel, Wendy Hart, Isabel Bishop, Councillor Barry Wood and Ashley Keane. As I mentioned at the outset, we really want to hear from you about topics to discuss in coming weeks and put questions on your behalf to our invited panellists. So do please get in touch via our social media channels. Don't forget there's a fabulous resource on the OxLEP website for all the matters that have been discussed today. So please get on to oxfordshirelep.com and find out more. Our next OxLEP Digital Q&A will be on the topic of the visitor economy. Follow us on social media for details and to post a question for the debate. But for now, from me, Howard Bentham, thanks for watching and stay safe.